following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. We are back when the Jints and the Bums played in New York with Noel Hynd. Noel is here, and special guest Alan Blumkin, the maven on Comfortably Zoned. The encyclopedia is joining us, and I'd like to welcome you, Alan.
Thank you, Ralph.
And I'd like to introduce again the esteemed Noel Hynd.
Thank you also. I'm okay and ready to go. So
yeah,
you're the leader. You go ahead, Ralph.
Well, my intent today was to talk about Willie, Mickey, and the Duke, and how they captured New York, and start with our guest, who's a Yankee aficionado and was so close to those teams in the 50s and 60s. Alan Blumkin, weigh in a little bit on Mickey Mantle.
Oh, Mickey Mantle. In fact, as I was saying before, my first year of following was 1951, which was the rookie year for both Mickey Mantle and Duke Snider. Now, Mickey Mantle came up in 1951, and he was immediately, because of his spring training, dubbed as a successor to Joe DiMaggio, who retired after that year. And Mantle was a 19-year-old, hick from Oklahoma, and all of a sudden he's the heir to the king, Joe DiMaggio. And Mantle had trouble in his first season. In fact, they had to ship him to the minors for a month to get his head on straight. And he came back and developed into a terrific ball player. I mean, he was limited because of his the knee, where he got kicked in during a high school football game, and he developed osteomyelitis, which kept him out of the Army, and he was heavily criticized by a lot of these flag wavers for being a communist because he wasn't drafted. And then, I'm serious, and then he tore the other knee up in the World Series against the Giants. And so he was playing on bad knees for the rest of his career. And he, started relatively improving every year. In 1956, he broke out and won the Triple Crown. He led the league in hitting, home runs, and RBIs, and became an incredible celebrity. I mean, there's a song that was released called I Love Mickey by Teresa Brewer. And the next year he had, in 1957, he had 365, and he walked a tremendous number of times. But what happened in that World Series against the Braves, he was involved in a collision at second base where he hurt his shoulder and never was the same hitter left-handed after that. So he produced tremendous numbers, but it's always been a what-if with him. What if he had remained healthy and all that? And there are people who think that if he remained healthy, that he would have been the greatest ever.
I wholeheartedly agree. And the reason I agree is because of what Casey Stengel said when Mickey first came up. He said, he's Ty Cobb with power.
Yeah.
So,
he came up as a shortstop, and he made his last full minor leagues was in 1950 in Class C ball with Joplin, Missouri. He made 55 errors at the shortstop, and when he came up, they made him into an outfielder. And a funny story was when they won a 1952 pennant and had opened the series up in Ebbets Field, and Stengel was leading him around to all the nooks and crannies of the center field and right field and Ebbets Field. Mantle turned to him and said, "What do you mean you played here?" And Snyder said, "You think I was born 60 years old?"
All right, I just want to, before we get on to the other two, I want to note that Mickey only became popular after or during the home run stretch. He won the fans of New York.
And when Maris came, because Maris was regarded as an outsider.
Maris became the bad guy.
He was regarded as an outsider. So in 1961, when they had the big chase, all of a sudden the fans loved Mantle. They were booing the hell out of him. In 1959, when he had probably his worst season before the decline started, in 1965, they were booing the hell out of him. And in 1961, Maris became the outsider, and since Maris really had no touch with the media at that point, and Mantle had developed one with them, Mantle became the good guy.
The New York, that's what it is, good guy against bad guy. And
may I backtrack for a second?
Sure.
I wanted to ask Alan a question which I've always wondered about, and you're the perfect person to answer it for me. When you mentioned that Mantle was injured in the 1957 World Series, do you happen to recall which game that was?
No. I can look that up. I know it was against Milwaukee. I don't remember what game it was, but I can find that out fairly easily. Yeah.
The reason I ask is the first game I ever went to at Yankee Stadium. My father took me to the World Series in 1957. We went to I believe it was game 6. The Yankees won it, I think 3-2, but Mantle was not in the lineup. And over the years, I kept looking at that, and I could never figure out why Mantle wasn't in the lineup.
Yeah, I would take a guess that was game 4 because game 5 was 1-0.
No, I know it was farther up.
Burdette beat Ford 1-0 in game 5. Game 4 was the one where Matthews hit the home run in the 10th inning, and there were a lot more people on base in that game than. So I figured it had to be either game 3 or game 4.
Where the injury occurred.
Where the injury occurred, yeah. He collided with Red Shanings.
That would make sense. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
On a personal note, my Giants at the end of 57 left New York. And I was not only a Giant fan, but a National League fan. And I rooted so hard for the Braves in 57 to beat the Yankees. And they didn't. In 58, I didn't root so hard, and they did. So what are you going to do? Or maybe it was reversed.
I think it was
yeah.
Well, the Yankees and Giants shared Channel 11 in those days, and they both of them only televised home games. And the Dodgers were on Channel 9, and since I hated the Dodgers so much, because where I grew up in Queens, nobody was born there my age. Everybody emigrated from Bronx and Brooklyn. I emigrated from the Bronx, and I hated the Dodgers so much that when both their games, the Dodgers and Giant games were on, and the Yankees weren't, I would watch the Giant game.
Ah, very interesting. You have Giant memories as well.
Oh, yeah.
How about some Dodger memories of Duke Snider? I'm going to call on Mr. Hynd.
You know, the last thing, when anyone mentions Duke Snider, oddly enough, the first memory of him that jumps into my mind has to do with Mickey Mantle, because there was a home run that Mantle hit in the 1956 World Series. It went to center field. I think it was at Yankee Stadium, but I could be wrong. But it was hit so hard and so far that there was an iconic picture of Snider standing in the outfield, and he never even looked at where the ball went. He didn't even turn around. As soon as the ball was hit, he knew it was gone. And that's what I always remember with Snyder. But that was a wonderful World Series in '56. Of course, it was get even for the Yankees. But I can remember Snyder was the guy that you really didn't want coming up if you were rooting against the Dodgers, which basically I was doing whenever I saw them back in those days. So, Snyder was a feared opponent, and he was a little older than the other two guys. I believe his first year was 1947, and somehow he always seemed like the weakest link of the three great outfielders, which was really a very unfair conclusion to come to. I also remember him one time toward the end of his career with the Mets, where Casey put him up to pinch hit with a game on the line, and really his abilities were gone, but it was what the fans wanted. I was at the game. It was at the Polo Grounds. I think it was against Cincinnati. There were runners on base, 2 out in the ninth. Everyone's yelling for Duke off the bench. Casey sent him up there, and he had somebody who was really a better hitter in terms of knocking home a run from second base at the time. That's how I remember Snyder. And of course, in my book, The Final Game at Ebbets Field, I got an interview with one of my former editors who edited the Duke Snyder book. It's called The Duke of Flatbush. I believe it was published by Zebra or Kensington around in the 1980s. And my editor had the privilege of taking Snyder around to bookstores in New York. And Snyder was actually fascinated by all the people who turned out to see him buying books. They still had the Brooklyn Dodgers in their hearts. A lot of people turned up to buy Father's Day gifts for their father. Duke sat there and signed everyone, was very personable, and was a huge hit. And I believe it broke the record that existed at the time at one of the Barnes & Nobles on Fifth Avenue for number of books signed in a day. So
yeah, I have a signed copy of that. Yeah, I have a signed.
Yeah.
They used to have a book festival in September in Manhattan, stretching from 42nd Street to 57th Street on Fifth Avenue, and this was ended in 2001 by the terrorist attack. And I remember that one because I bought a copy in the Barnes & Noble, and he was sitting in a booth outside signing the book, and I have a signed copy of that.
There you go.
Yeah.
Nice. All right, guys, it's my turn to chip in with a Willie Mays memory. I'm 5 years old, and my grandfather would take me to baseball games at the Polo Grounds, Yankee Stadium and Ebbets Field too, but mostly the Polo Grounds. And my distinct Mays memory was when he came up in March. Was it March or May?
May.
May.
Yeah, it was May, yeah.
They reconfigured the entire lineup. They moved Bobby Thompson, who had been playing center, to third. They also switched Monty Irvin and Whitey Lockman at that time. Monty was playing first, Whitey Lockman playing left. They switched. Monty wasn't adept at first base. He didn't like it. That seemed to work out. But my point was, as a 5-year-old kid, I remember the Giants lineup. I remember my grandfather explaining, that's Stanky and that's Dark at shortstop. I remember it before Willie was called up. And then I remember my grandfather looked, and he pointed, that's Willie Mays. In much the same way when in 51, he took me to Yankee Stadium, and his only point that he wanted to get in, the memory that he wanted me to have, he kept pointing to center field. That's Joe DiMaggio. That's, you remember, you always saw Joe DiMaggio. This was last year, this, that, and the other thing. So because of his influence and his impression, those two great center fielders were, indebted in my memory. And I remember him when he came back to the Mets, too. And it wasn't all Willie falling down and not doing well. He sparked them a little bit. He was, at whatever age he was, 42, the best of the three center fielders. Donnie Hahn was out there, Gasker. He still, when he got some rest, he was still at age 42 the best athlete on that ball field. So that's
he also on that team served as an inspiration for Cleon Jones, if you recall, and Willie's influence on the team was more than his batting average or more than his plate appearances, because the other players just were still in awe of the guy, particularly Jones, who was also from Alabama, and who's, if you go back and look at the batting averages and the performance, Jones really, it's a nice way to say it, came alive for the Mets in that year.
Right. And you mentioned Cleon Jones. I just want to throw this out here, that Cleon Jones, after his baseball career, has led a wonderful life of helping kids and keeping the game alive for children. He is turned into quite a man, and as a Met fan, I'm very proud of Cleon Jones.
Good to know.
30 years ago, I did a project on players that lost time because they were in the service during Korea. I mean, most of them weren't there in Korea, but they were at various Army bases. And I was checking to see whether Willie Bass played 34 games that season, and he didn't miss any. And he went in May of 1952, and was there for the rest of 52 and the entire season of 1953. And if he had been on the Giants during that period, he probably would have been the first one to challenge the Ruth 714 record.
No question. And had he not played in the ballparks that he played, I'm not making excuses for the guy. Hit 665 home runs. But had he had a little bit of a more friendly hitter's park, two hitter's parks, he might have broken it even with the service time.
Yeah, well, they switched they managed to switch the draft board from Alabama to New York, but all that did was buy him a couple of extra weeks before he went in, and Ted Williams and Wade Ford were the three Hall of Famers that lost time to during their careers to be in the military in those years.
Okay.
But he was Willie was right away he became a star, and there's one thing he did against the Dodgers. They had a runner on third. I think it was Billy Cox, and Mays made a throw from the outfield that nobody thought that Cox would be caught, at home plate. And Mays threw a perfect throw to Western. He tagged Cox out, and the Dodger manager, Charlie Dressen, went nuts. And he said, I'd like to see him do that again.
Yeah, I believe
but he became immortal basically because of the catch in the 1954 World Series.
And it was the throw that was the more spectacular of the two.
Yeah.
I mean, he held Dark he held Al Rosen at first base, kept the double play in order.
I think Dobie was the other runner. Larry Dobie.
Yes.
And when they moved to San Francisco, and I think Noel vouched for this, that he was not accepted by them for quite a while because he had the New York brand on him. And outside of Mays and Johnny Antonelli, they got rid of everybody on that team that had a New York brand.
Right. Except the coaches.
Well, Wrigley was managing them at the time when they moved.
Yes, but I thought when Doc took over, brought all the old guys, Lockman as a coach, a few others.
But they had Thompson and Lockman and Mueller was still on the team in 1957. Thompson had come back in a trade with the Braves that where the Giants sent Red Cheney to Milwaukee, and Lockman came back from St. Louis. He was there for half a season, and Mueller was there, and they got rid of all of them before 1958, before the move.
Right. They had so many guys coming up, and there are rumors that both the Dodgers and the Giants basically tanked 1957.
Yeah, well, I think, I led forth because they brought up a ton of rookies in 58, led by Orlando Cepeda, and they may have kept them down in the minors in 57, and they wound up finishing sixth, so they wouldn't, it wouldn't be a problem with the moving. But they and all can confirm this, that if the Dodgers hadn't picked up a move to L.A., announced that, the Giants would have wound up moving to Minneapolis.
No question. In my mind, Noel, what do you think of that?
I would tend to agree. The Minneapolis, the potential Minneapolis move was always a little vague. But, San Francisco was vague at the time also. The one thing that impeded O'Malley to move to Los Angeles was, as you both know, the Major League Baseball or the National League told him that he could only do it if he took another club with him, sort of like taking a hostage. And so, of course, he gets Stoneham to take the Giants to San Francisco. There was not that impediment that was standing in front of the Giants to go to Minneapolis. The league most likely would have let that move go and be in effect because Minneapolis was not that far from, say, Chicago and Milwaukee, and it was a logical next stop for expansion. So I would say, yes, it might not have been in 1958, but I think Stoneham was going to head to Minneapolis if he didn't get a new playing facility. But, it's hard to guess because if the Dodgers weren't moving, would the city of New York had actually come around and provided a new ballpark for the Giants? Would the Giants have gone to Flushing Meadow? I don't know. It's always possible. You had Robert Moses in the mix, who basically at that point in his career didn't see a situation that he couldn't make worse. So who knows? The short answer to your question is yes. I think they would have done it if the city hadn't provided something else. There was also a plan where the Giants would play in Yankee Stadium for a couple of years while a new stadium was constructed. So, again, that was in the mix, but it just plain didn't happen because, in my opinion, O'Malley was intent on moving and nothing was going to stop him, and no offer that the city made was going to be acceptable. So.
Okay. Speaking of alternative plans, the Giants and Dodgers both played in Jersey City at one time or another. Alan, can you?
It was a Giant farm club for years. It was the AAA, one of the AAA farm teams. They never play a regularly scheduled game there, except the one game against the Dodgers every year. For the 2 years, the Dodgers in 1956 and 1957 had one game scheduled with each team that they played in Jersey City. The Giants never played there. As I just said, the Giants never played there except for the two games with the Dodgers in the 2 years as a major league team.
You guys are encyclopedias. Incredible. Okay, before we leave, and I want to make this a regular part of our show, Noel and Alan, it seems that you're fitting right in, and you're an additive as you are to everything Uncomfortably Zoned. I'd like you to both address socially how things were when the bums and the Giants and them bums and the Giants played in New York. How were things socially in direct contrast to how they are today? Start with you, Noel.
Well, a person with modest income could live in Manhattan, for starters. I think I'd need several hours to really, answer that. In terms of baseball, socially, baseball was the most popular sport in the country. So almost everybody who you knew in New York, particularly kids, you had a team. You had a team you loved. You had a team that you hated. You had a member of your own family who rooted for the other team in New York. It was really a much more stripped-down time. I believe, as you probably know, I was a crime writer for many years. In New York City in 1956, right before the teams left, I believe there were 250 homicides. 250. Measure that against the time, 20 years later, when it was something like 2,500, and I can remember several cops saying that, one homicide out of two is not even reported. It's marked up natural causes. I can remember, I'm going off on a tangent. It was a time when at least there was a perception that the streets were safer, but the subcurrents were you did have street gangs on the west side and in a lot of sections of Manhattan. The old saying, nostalgia ain't what it used to be, kind of applies. It was a tough era. It was a repressive era, but a lot of people see it as a nicer era, and the presence of the three teams in the city, I think, that was one of the positives, and I think it made the city overall, for most white people, a more pleasant place to live. So there's my long-winded answer to that.
Beautiful. And we'll pursue all of this on future shows. We're just cracking the surface.
Yeah, all I want to say, living in Queens and having to take a bus and 2 trains to get to Yankee Stadium or the Polo Grounds, when I was 12 years old during the daytime, I was able to do this with a friend of mine during the daytime hours, but by ourselves without any adult supervision or anything like that. And when I was in grade school, junior high school, or high school, we didn't have to do any lockdown drills.
Yeah.
Yes. It was, for a number of reasons, a more pleasant existence, but it wasn't stress-free, as Noel alluded to. There were gangs, there were problems, inner-city problems, but I really miss those days.
Well, yeah. We let's be blunt. we are white guys, and basically white guys ruled at the time. So to some degree, it worked better for us. Should it have? That's a different question. But times have changed, and it's fun to read about and talk about days like this, but you would never catch me trying to turn back the clock to, the days of McCarthyism, or before, the Civil Rights Act, or before penicillin. But again, this is a topic we can expand on in another podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us, Alan.
I enjoyed this very, very much. Noel, it's been a pleasure.
Alan, thank you. Alan was my father's name, by the way, so I know you're a good man. I know right off. And we look forward to talking again. It was a pleasure to meet you. Take care.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for listening. It's the Comfortably Zoned Network. We've had Alan Blumkin join us today. Noel Hynd is the host. And I'm Ralph Tyko, kind of the weak link of it all. But we shall return, and stay well, everybody. Thank you again.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.